All right, good morning, party people. So this is December 7th, number 2. So please go back to number 1 to see what's going on. So we had just finished with Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a good king. Let me show you my notes. So Hezekiah was a good king. Last time we were in Second Chronicles. Where is he? Over here. He has a heart because he was a good king. Now we're studying his son Manasseh, who's doing horrible, evil things just like his grandfather Ahaz. He's burning his children in the fire, practicing all kinds of witchcraft, sorcery, soothsaying. Then we're also going to cover his son Ammon, and then the coming of the good king Josiah. Okay, so right now we're just seeing how I left off in chapter 33 on the first video, verse 9, where he had Manasseh, Hezekiah, who was a good king. Manasseh was an evil king. He had seduced the nation of Israel to follow him in worshiping false idols. Okay, so now we're in verse 10. And the Lord's and so Manasseh goes into captivity because of all this. And the Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they would not listen. So in 2 Kings, you see prophets going to Manasseh. You see a little bit more of this fleshed out. First Chronicles, again, First Chronicles is written by Ezra when they were coming out of Babylonian captivity. He had gathered all these documents from the prophets and First and Second Kings to create the First and Second Chronicles to encourage the people that were going back to rebuild the temple and the nation of Israel, right? Excuse me. So you don't see him focus a whole lot on, well, you don't see him focus at all in First and Second Chronicles on the Northern Kingdom, because these guys are the ones, he doesn't care about these guys. None of these, all these guys in parentheses, they don't even mention in First and Second Chronicles. That's the Northern Kingdom. And even the bad kings in the Southern Kingdom aren't given a lot of information. It's just real short information about how, when they do wrong, the consequences and what they did wrong. Whereas the good kings are really highlighted, right? So Hezekiah had multiple chapters about all the wonderful things he was doing. So here we see in a short chapter 33, verses 1 through 9, how evil Manasseh was, which we covered in the last video, and then what happens to Manasseh, right? And Manasseh was in the Southern Kingdom, so he's in the lineage of Jesus, right? The Davidic line. Excuse me, it says verse 10, and the Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they would not listen. Therefore the Lord brought upon them the captains of the army of the kings of Assyria, who took Manasseh with hooks, bound him with bronze fetters, and carried him off to Babylon. So we mentioned last time we were in, God, what book was it? Oh, it was in Luke. We were in John yesterday. How bronze, when you see bronze utilized here in the Bible, it's a metal that is symbolic of judgment, right? So they were talking about the bronze serpent that was lifted up. And that was yesterday's video. So go back and watch that. I don't want to go into that. I don't have time. But so here you're seeing, again, bronze fetters, right? So he's being captured and carried away in bronze handcuffs. So bronze is symbolic of judgment. And carried him off to Babylon. So he was, Manasseh, the king, was taken captive by Babylon. Now when he was in affliction, he implored the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers and prayed to him, and God received his entreaty, heard his supplication, and brought him back to Jerusalem into his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. Now that's unheard of, but that's also symbolic of what's going to happen after Babylon, right? After, when they do come back. And that was probably why this is mentioned here. It's kind of highlighted because the whole point of Second Chronicles was when they were going back to from Babylon captivity back to Israel. So he's showing him here that even this evil king, God heard his cry when he repented, and then brought him back to his kingdom, which is crazy. I think this is the only person that I can think of that happened to. And after this, he built a wall outside the city of David on the west side of Gihon in the valley, as far as the entrance of the fish gate, and it enclosed Ophel. And he raised it to a very great height. Then he put military captains in all the fortified cities of Judah. Now they said that these were the ones that were captured and taken away by, was it Nebuchadnezzar? Not Nebuchadnezzar. It was his, these are the ones that had been taken captive by Assyria. Now he's taken them back. He took away the foreign gods and the idol from the house of the Lord and all the altars that he had built in the mount of the house of the Lord and in Jerusalem, and he cast them out of the city. He also repaired the altar of the Lord, sacrificed peace offerings and thank offerings on it, and commanded Judah to serve the Lord God of Israel. So here they use the word commanded Judah to serve the Lord God of Israel. But up above, when it was talking about when he was operating evilly before he went into captivity, how he seduced Judah, right? So there's totally different language there. So seduction is being hidden, sneaky, trying to sneak things in. That's how the devil works, right? So it's not always black and white. He starts with getting you to do a little bit of sin, or just blurring the edges a little bit, so you walk a little bit this way, and then next thing you know, you've crossed boundaries, right? So that's what is inferred here when you see he seduced the nation to serve other gods. But down here it says he commanded them. So his heart is completely changed, and he's telling them they must do these things. Nevertheless, the people still sacrificed on the high places, but only to the Lord their God. So what they did is they just kept the high places on the hills and these where they had been worshiping these false gods, and they just turned them into altars for worshiping God. And then it says, verse 18, now the rest of the acts of Manasseh, his prayer to his God, and the words of the seers who spoke to him in the name of the Lord God of Israel, indeed they are written in the book of the kings of Israel. So again, this is Ezra, the scribe, who's putting together Second Chronicles, giving his source data, right? He's citing his sources. He's telling you where you can find this information, where he gathered the information, and where you can gather that information. And then what talks about the seers who spoke to him in the name of the Lord. So this is going to be fleshed out in 2 Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings. If you go over there, you're going to see the prophets that went to Manasseh and tried to correct him when he was walking so evilly. And it says also his prayer and how God received his entreaty and all his sins and trespass in the sites where he built high places and set up wooden images and carved images before he was humbled. Indeed, they are written among the sayings of Hosea. I didn't look that up. I think that's Hosea. I have to look, but it's he's quoting here one of the prophets. So Manasseh rested with his fathers, and they buried him in his own house. Then his son Amon reigned in his place. So what you see here is Manasseh, who was the evil king originally. He turned and came back to God, but his evilness was so bad at the beginning, he did not get to get buried with where all the other good kings were buried. He was buried in his own house. So that's not a good sign. And now we see Amon, his son, reigning in his place. So verse 21, chapter 33, 2nd Chronicles. Amon was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 2 years in Jerusalem. But he did evil in the sight of the Lord, as his father Manasseh had done. For Amon sacrificed to all the carved images which his father Manasseh had made, and served them. And he did not humble himself before the Lord, as his father Manasseh had humbled himself. But Amon trespassed more and more. Then his servants, Amon's servants, conspired against him and killed him in his own house. But the people of the land executed all those who had conspired against King Amon. Then the people of the land made his son Josiah king in his place. Okay, so now we're into chapter 34. So King Josiah takes the throne, and he's going to be very young. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord and walked in the ways of his father David. He did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. So that's an awesome beginning, right? So Josiah was just a baby when he became king, only 8 years old. So clearly he had good guidance. There's someone around him that is guiding him and leading him away from his grandfather Ahaz, or his great-grandfather Ahaz's behavior, and his father Manasseh, or his grandfather was Manasseh, who was, see, it's hard to keep these people straight. Let me show you on here. So this is good King Josiah down here. His father was Amon, who only reigned a couple of years and was murdered. And so his grandfather was Manasseh, who was also evil. He's the one that was taken captive and then went back to Jerusalem. But good King Hezekiah was his great-grandfather. So he's taking after his great-grandfather. And they also mention him and call him, say in his father David, right? So anytime you see when they're calling someone after David, that's always an amazing good sign. So now verse 3 says, for in the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. And in the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the wooden images, the carved images, and the molded images. They broke down the altars of Baals in his presence, and the incense altars which were above them he cut down, and the wooden images, the carved images, and the molded images he broke in pieces and made dust of them and scattered it on the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. Now that is powerful. I'm going to do a third video just to get through chapter 34 because there's some really cool stuff here that I want to go into. All right, so stay tuned. Jesus is coming. If you haven't seen the first video, watch the first video. Stay tuned for the third video. Okay, get a good study Bible. Nelson is what I use. Step Bible app also. Peace. Hold tight. Number 3's coming.